Faith Works Live. Here's your host, Rebecca Haynie.
You are listening to Faith Works Live, and I'm so glad you are. This is Rebecca Haynie, and you probably hear the emotion in my voice. This is not an easy day to be in front of the microphone, to be remembering more victims of another school shooting. And this is something that happens far too often. I am mourning as a human being, as a mom of young children, as someone who cares about life. And sadly, several of the victims in the Nashville Covenant School were children and teachers and grandparents and people who love their families, loved the Lord. This was a Christian school. The facts on the ground that will state, as far as we know, depending on when you're listening to this, but we know that 6 victims have been named. The shooter involved who committed this heinous act was killed in the course of their crime. And we will talk about them from the outset. We'll just say that this conversation is going to be pretty tough. We're going to go into basically, how did we get here? Our reflection and response. Dan Hudson is going to help lead this conversation with me today as we go over what we know and the cries of our heart in response to that. I'm seeing 2 very different responses to this particular incident. And a lot of it is political in nature, but there is an eternal perspective above all that I think the people of God have to transcend and respond from a place of eternal truth and not just a temporary political reaction. So that's our goal. Dan, I just want to take a moment at the beginning and recognize the names of Evelyn Deekhouse, Haley Scruggs, William Kinney. They're 9 years old. They were taken from us by this act of evil. Cynthia Peak, and Catherine Kuntz, and Mike Hill were all in their 60s, and they were teachers and administrators at this school. And we pray, right, for their families and for all the people that are hurting today for this horrendous loss that should never have happened. But those are the identities that matter today. What we're hearing in the news is focused on the shooter. And so often it seems we glamorize and we make famous the wrong people in these circumstances, so much so that it can create the opposite effect of what you would want. It can conversely and perversely start glamorizing the people that commit these horrible acts. And it can actually bring about more of them. Studies show that psychologically this has the opposite effect of what you'd want. So I don't want to glamorize or glorify the shooter. I wanted to identify the names of the victims because they were innocent people that were targeted. It seems at this time, what we know about the motivation of the shooter, these people were targeted because they stood with Jesus. And we are mourning with their families. I can't even imagine what the parents of those children or the folks that have lost their loved ones are going through right now. We are not grieving as those without hope, but it is a time to mourn together. So into this, we seek your counsel today, Pastor Dan Hudson from Pathway Church. Dan, help us wrap our minds and our hearts around this.
I'll tell you what, with all the conversation going on out there, I believe the janitor, there was a janitor who was shot. I don't think his 8 children really care the gender of the shooter. They don't care the politics behind it or the arguments back and forth. They just lost dad. I've read the pastor lost his daughter. That hits me. I have 2 daughters. And so, I don't know if that was on purpose, let's go after that pastor's daughter or what. But it's too bad in our society we've gotten to this point where on one hand, it's not surprising. The whole nation went to a standstill, in Columbine, like no one could breathe for days. It seemed like as a nation, we're still shocked, we still pause. Then we start having silly debates. There are family members right now who still aren't breathing yet. They're trying to catch their breath. They're trying to get their footing. They're trying to figure out what in the world happened. Why isn't our child coming home? Why isn't dad coming home or mom or grandma? We've in many ways, all of the spiritual decline and battles and just societal decay, I guess is the word I'm looking for, has gotten to the point that it's happening too often. It should never happen at all, but it's happening too often. And we really need to make some corrections, I believe, in order to help society out. But first, let these families have some space, and some time and some healing. Yeah, I say that as if it's going to happen overnight or something. But yeah, my heart goes out to them. My heart goes out to that community. My heart goes out to that school. The whole nation. And yeah, it's just an awful thing to be a part of and to read and hear the stories. And I know we're going to learn more. Like you said, we're going to find out more. And then that's going to lead to more silly bickering. But some of that stuff has to be said. Where do we go? Where do we go? This whole world, this whole nation needs revival and needs Jesus. And that, honestly, you and I know that's the heart of where this boils down to.
So the last thing that I want to do is rush to react and rush to be wrong.
Oh, sure.
So I've been thinking and praying about this since it happened and thinking, what on earth could I say that's going to add and not detract, that's going to be wise and not foolish to the middle of this. And my first response is just hurting with the parents, hurting with the loved ones, the people that have lost their dearest son or daughter in the middle of all of this. But what makes me angry is to see the politicization of this particular incident. No matter what, you'll hear the same kind of predictable voices talk about how it's the guns, it's gun violence, and kind of blaming the object that's involved for the act of murder itself. And we can have those conversations about what policies are effective, what policies are helpful. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in the right to defend yourself, specifically because of the evil that is present in this horrible, awful world. I believe that you can use whatever, appropriate means necessary to defend what is innocent, to defend what you love. So that's where I stand. But you can have those types of conversations. The only time, though, that politically we end up in this discussion is when something tragic like this happens and emotions run high. So that is not a good time to make policy. That's my take for what it's worth. But this particular incident is strange and rare because of the identity of the shooter. And so that's where a lot of the focus has been placed. This person is a female, which makes it very, very rare indeed. I think it was NBC that said they'd been cataloging school shootings and they have that defined. And they have fewer than 20 since 1979, fewer than 20 of the mass shootings that we've cataloged in our nation have been at the hands of women. It's just something that's almost exclusively male. So that was the main takeaway and the main headline. Everybody ran with this. Oh, wow. Female is the perpetrator. And it now comes out several hours later that the woman in question was in fact a woman, but was choosing to identify as a male and apparently had been struggling with that and adding more and more distance and more layers to the incident. Apparently with the motivation. We don't have all of this person's writings at that time. Apparently the shooter told someone close to her that she intended to die, intended to create havoc, and that this was a statement that she wanted to make. This was completely intentional, which is very disturbing to say the least. But now, because of where we are in this Romans 1 world, we have every media outlet that ran with the female shooter headline had to go back and apologize and make obeisance for using the wrong pronouns. I saw CNN, I saw MSNBC, I saw NBC, everyone from that side of the aisle, supposedly the wisest voices among us, seemingly less concerned about the crime that had taken place, taking time out of their reporting on this mass murder to apologize for misgendering the murderer. And that's the type of thing that makes me angry. Because that doesn't seem like you care about the truth about what's really happened here at all, about the real harm done, about the real crimes being perpetrated, about the real violence, the real destruction. If you're willing to play politics in this type of situation, I can't really trust you to tell me the truth about anything. Clearly, we see the world in two totally different ways. We don't have anything in common at that point.
The moment you start getting a population to question the existence of a God, the living God, an eternal God with eternal consequences, The moment you start getting a population to question the value of human life, you get them to question the truth of character and morality and integrity and just basic building blocks of a good society. You get them to question that. And then you have the adults in the room stop being adults and just let these confused children run around and raise themselves. Well, they grow up very frustrated, very angry, full of mental illness, full of questioning their very identity, and they change it back and forth from day to day, season to season, I'll put it that way, multiple times. It's extremely sad what we've done to this generation. Then they go out and do what you would do if you don't believe in a God, or if there is no character and it doesn't matter, you can make your own truth, and there is no eternal life and there's no value of human beings. And no one ever said no to you in a real way to stop you from doing harmful things to yourself, like changing genders or whatever is going on. It leads to all kinds of inner pain. And now we're seeing it not only be inner pain, but express itself outwardly. If that's her goal, she wanted to die and she was too cowardly to do it herself. She thought she'd cause pain for everybody else and let other people take care of her. That's sad. Again, we don't know all the details, but there's things to learn. But that's not surprising for me to hear that, because we have moved away from the building blocks of our society. And that's why things are crumbling. And that's why there's decay. And that's why this will become just more and more often, I think, going to become just a routine thing, which is horribly sad for any nation. Is just where we're at. I suppose some of the things I said there, engage in the political conversation, but it's like, I don't even want to play that game. This is humanity, and this is God and his creation running as far away from him as they can. And this is what happens.
Right. Well, and worldviews have consequences. We talk about that an awful lot. And if we are so willing to deny the very bounds of reality that God gives to us, is it any wonder that we perform heinous action? I mean, if you are letting the most rambunctious 5-year-old make all the rules and you're not willing to love them enough to tell them no, they're going to end up hurting themselves and somebody else. That's just what happens. And that's not to infantilize anyone. Like, we can say that we're adults and we know better, but if we're screaming in rage at the very bounds of reality, like the way that God made us, and we're looking at ourselves and we're saying, this is wrong, and I can remake myself in my own image, and I can be whatever I want to be, and it can be different from day to day. That's not freedom. And that's not love, to allow someone to cast off all boundaries and all restraints such that they're denying reality. I mean, if you love someone and they believe they can fly, you don't allow them to jump off a 15-story building with their arms out. That's not love. What you do is you love them enough to say, hey, you need an airplane ticket if you want to fly, because gravity is real. Like, there's just some certain bounds of reality, and we have to find ways that we, can understand and can come to terms with that. Now, I am not a psychologist, but I know enough to say that if this confusion is that real, then the way to love someone is to help them come to terms with how they were created and how wonderful that is, how wonderfully you as a female, as a male, express God's design and how much God loves you, and that he didn't make a mistake with you, and that you have something to offer and to bring to the world that's unique, but to help you understand why you're maybe disassociated or so uncomfortable with your body. That's actual help. It is not help to pretend it away. It is not help to cooperate with a delusion. It is not help to then re-educate everyone else around you into accepting this lie. That's the farthest thing from help and love. And now, again, some of these details have yet to come out about the shooter's motivations. We know some things about what the police have revealed. So that's what I'm sticking to as far as the fact. But we know that this shooter did once attend this same school. So in her mind, it's reasonable to assume that she was coming here for a reason. She wanted to make her mark presumably against what she was raised to believe, or where she once associated, something that emotionally triggered her. And that's a really scary thing. Like, as a mom, and I know we need to take a break here because, I don't want Ron to have to do too much more math. That's what happens is if I'm late for a break, he has to do a whole bunch of mental math. And I care about you too much, Ron, to have to make you do math. So I promise we're heading in for a break. But on the other side, I just want to acknowledge the reality of how difficult it is to show love and to be reasonable and not fearful in these types of situations. Like as a Christian parent, you want to provide the best for your children. You want to protect them. You want to give them a good education. And when you see, maybe you think a private Christian school, how could kids be much safer? A private Christian school in the South. And so this has hit home for a lot of people to see that this is the target. It's archetypal in a way, like this is sort of the picture of innocences, elementary school kids going into a Christian school in Bible Belt America and learning that they are not safe. And so dealing with this as a Christian parent, as mom, and also as someone who wants to be able to protect my children, to care for them well, and then sincerely love my enemies. The battle lines have been drawn. And if you're not concerned, if you're not feeling like you can take a stand in this fight, I don't know what to tell you. I don't think there's any room left for middle ground. I think the lines have been drawn. I think violence has been pushed by the other side. And we can get into all of that, not because it's political, but because I think we have to know how to react as the people of God, how to transcend the binary that is out there in the world, where both sides are just angry and shaking their fists and waiting like a powder keg to explode. The people of God must respond differently. And I'm not sure I have all the right answers, but we can at least talk about it. We can broach the subject and prayerfully try to rise above to the extent that we can love those in our households, and we can love our enemies. Does that sound like a good goal?
It's a great goal.
You're on board with me? Okay.
I'm in.
Where angels fear to tread. Dan Hudson is going to lead us through the valley. When we come back, Rebecca Haynie is my name. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. I would love to hear what you think as well as we work our way through a Christian response to this level of evil. When evil attacks, how do the people of God respond? We're responding today to the shooting at Nashville Covenant School. Again, prayerfully, we mourn with those families who've lost their dear loved ones, but we do not mourn as those without hope, because death is not the end. But how do we respond to the culture of death that is promoting this and that is eager for destruction to come about? How do we stand up boldly and say no? How do we stand for life? We'll discuss that coming up next on Faith Works Live.
Information that matters to you and your family. This is Your Beacon, Iowa's Hope 940.
Faith Works Live, and I'm so glad you're here with us. Rebecca Haynie is my name. I do believe that faith works. And just how do we live it out? That's a tricky question sometimes. And it's not very comfortable. These are difficult times, I think, to live comfortably as a Christian. We can still be Christian. Like, Jesus is still on the throne. He is victorious no matter what. But our circumstances in 21st century America make it sometimes a little less comfortable. And today is a day where I feel anything but I want to extend comfort. I'm mourning with those who mourn in Nashville in the wake of the Covenant School shooting. This is a very difficult topic as a mom, hopefully as a human being. We can understand and relate in compassion and empathy towards those who have lost their loved ones. 6 victims in total. 3 of them were 9 years old, and 3 of them were in their 60s working at the small private Christian school. Nashville, as I understand, is a pretty tight-knit community. So the whole city is mourning, and they should feel the support of and the prayers of every single American right now. This is unique, and it was uniquely politicized and has been because the shooter was female. Which almost never happens. Increasing complications, this female shooter identified as transgender, meaning they believed or went by male identities. This was a 28-year-old woman who desired to be known as a man. We don't know, I don't know an awful lot about her at this point, other than what the police have stated. Apparently she lived at home, and her parents at one point sent her to this very school. She was a former student. I would assume in elementary years. So when she was a little girl, she went here. And so it's not far-fetched to imagine that she targeted the school specifically because of her experiences, because of their Christian beliefs, and probably a combination of both. There will be no shortage of speculating over the motivations and manifestos in the days to come. But right now, I want to mourn with the people who have lost their loved ones today. I want to commend Officer Rex Engelbert and Officer Michael Colazzo, who are the ones who responded bravely to this school and took out the shooter. That's something that, as we have this political conversation about guns, firearms, what do we do to protect? And is it the gun's fault? The answer is no. And this is why. Taking guns out of this situation could have prevented maybe one form of evil. But when you have a bad guy with a gun, or a bad gal with a gun, in this case, there were some brave law enforcement officers who went in and did what needed to be done to protect. Because imagine how much worse this could have been if they hadn't responded. The law enforcement, from all I can see, watching the security footage, because the shooter went to, all the doors were secured, but some of the doors were glass. And the shooter had weapons where she could shoot through the glass door. She shattered the glass doors in order to gain access. So it took law enforcement about 14 minutes to bring this situation to a resolution, which is really good response time. From everything I can see, they handle things very well. And I just want to commend Officer Engelbert and Officer Colazzo for saving the lives that they did and responding, I would say, heroically in this situation. I commend the Nashville Police Department for their response to this as well.
Yeah, it was, what would we do without them, right? They run into trouble to help. That's super. I was sitting here thinking that what we often do is, just as believers, as Christians, we're like, well, how can I help? We feel helpless, I can pray, and that's powerful and that's good. But I thought, we can't. It's possible to start maybe reversing the trend. I mean, but it takes all of us. Not a program at a church or that one speaker who goes around and talks. It takes the entire Christian community to really step forward. I think I've got several friends who are in youth ministry, and their youth groups. The more I hear from them, their youth groups are filled with kids that are confused in the same way this woman was. They're changing gender back and forth, can't decide who they want to date, what gender they want to date, and just all the stuff. We all know that. But it's in our churches. It's everywhere. It's currently just very popular, and we can sit and say, man, that's terrible. I can't believe it. Not my child. Whatever. All the stuff. But the fact is, it's happening, and how are we responding? I kind of think as that movie, the Jesus Revolution came out, we see how the church in the 70s were treating the hippies. I think we're doing the same thing to this group. And it's really the same thing. It's just not drugs. It's just sex, that we're ostracizing them, we're pushing them away. We're not having conversations with them. We just want them to change, but they're not going to, because no one's telling them to, in the positive way. And it's like, I think really what we need to do is engage the students around us that we know. I mean, I can't do anything in Nashville, but I have people within 2 miles of me that I can build a relationship with and have conversations with. I mean, you're probably, I have 2 high school students right now that I mentor every week. I meet once a week with 2 different students. One's at the school in a mentoring situation. So that's not really spiritual in nature, but it's conversation, it's positive. It's, hey, you're having an adult conversation that you might not have otherwise. So there's maybe some morality and nudging. But I have a student in my church outside of youth groups that now we're meeting once a week, and we're having like a Bible study. And we're talking, we're having conversation. He has these great questions that I don't know. I mean, neither one of these that I know of are like having these issues we're talking about. But surely, if every single Christian said, I figure out something to do to connect with this younger generation, have them come over and rake leaves with them and pay them whatever to, whatever. I mean, something that don't be creepy, and it's kind of weird too with all these adults
No,
trying to connect with kids, So
it worked
put
for
safeguards.
It worked for Mr. Miyagi.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Hey, wash my car. I mean, but I'm just saying we just push them aside or ignore them, pretend they'll go away, or complain about them and hope that helps. And it's a growing thing. It's not declining. It's
Right.
growing exponentially. That's why I say this will only get worse if we don't do something. And it's not going to, just like the hippies, it didn't help, and the church said, stop it, get a haircut and take a bath, that'll do it. It's like, that didn't do anything. It took someone like a Chuck Smith to get in and say, hey, I'll meet you on your terms, and open up the Bible and walk through it. And then it started that movement, and I just think somewhere in our existence as a church, we're kind of missing the mark. And hopefully we can learn from previous generations, because they're going after this. They're trying to fill that God gap in their life, and they're doing it with all the wrong things. And at some point, someone's got to be, hey, I can tell you what you need. I know exactly what'll fill that longing you have in your heart. It's not to be with a guy or a girl or a cat or whatever the thing is. The moment,
Right.
it's God, and he loves you. And he wants to give you a better life than where you're headed right now. And so I really think the church can engage better in that. But it's, don't wait for a program. Don't wait for somebody to, just, you got to look around you and see who God leads you to.
Well, and I think you said so much gold there. The definition of love is really at stake, I think, in a lot of Christians' hearts and minds, because the culture is pushing this agenda so hard that they're saying that if you don't agree with me, if you don't acquiesce, if you don't accept, if you don't affirm, if you don't celebrate now, if you don't use the language that I choose, if I don't put, if we don't let them put their words in our mouth, then that's not love, and you're not being loving enough. And in extreme cases, you may get canceled, you may get persecuted, you may get shut down, all of those things. That's it. It's a real issue as far as, us making the stand to refuse to be silent anymore. But we do need to engage in love. That has to be our primary motivation, but it has to be love as God defines it, because he's in charge of all this. It's not our universe to redefine. Like, we're not the ones who designed humanity. We were made in God's image, not the other way around. And we can't subvert love. We can't translate it to mean something else just because it's politically expedient or more popular. And we can't allow the rest of the world to cause us to shut down and shut up, because that's the last thing that someone who is in danger, someone who is confused, someone who is searching around for something to fulfill them and finding looking for love in all the wrong places. They're finding the most dangerous temptations that to try and seek to fill that void. Exactly as you said, there's a sense of identity. They're looking for who they are. They're looking for belonging. We can all relate to that. It just looks different in this generation, perhaps, because again, we've untethered ourselves from the basic foundations that have kept us close, those institutions that once at least kept us close to God and gave us these ideas of right and wrong, like 10 Commandments level understandings. And, even if we weren't doing right, we kind of knew where right was roundabout on the map. And now we're just so lost. On the whole, we are utterly lost, and we're looking for anything else to fill the void and any experience to try and make it, make us whole again. And it's not working. But the last thing the church needs to do is shut down these discussions or run off to our own little enclaves. But we do that based in fear. And I understand that. We don't want to, not everybody is comfortable standing up on a microphone and saying, I don't care if I lose friends. Men are different than women. I don't care. God made us to be different. And that is a beautiful thing. And if you're not sure which one you are, we've got to go back to our biology. There's a fact, not a feeling. That's the biological sex is a fact, not a feeling. And I lose friends over things like that, but that's not as scary as someone, being willing to take up arms against you and saying, you're my enemy and I'm going to eliminate you violently. And that's, I think, just the sobering reality that we have to look at, not to fearmonger in any way. I'm not about that, but to say, let's understand the gravity of what we're talking about here. And as a parent, as a mom, I'm thinking, well, if a Christian school, a private Christian school and elementary school in the South isn't safe from this type of thing, I think we need to be aware. we need to be willing to take precautions so that we're not throwing our children into dangerous environments. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not going to step back and shrink away in cowardice from responding in love, even to my enemies. That's really the call of being a disciple of Christ. And I mean, that's daunting, and it's going to require some courage on our part, but I don't want to be responding in fear. But I guess maybe my question to you is, as an experienced Christian leader, father, how do you figure out the best way to go? How do you thread that needle between protecting those who are close to you, especially protecting your household and your kids, and reaching out in love towards those who are definitely on the other side, who would identify themselves as your enemy? You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really do anything about someone who looks at you as an enemy, but you don't change your life. You don't change what you're teaching. You don't change how you're living. In the school setting, I think you do maybe rethink and continually reevaluate, are my children genuinely safe in this setting? And what does that mean for my family? I know I would do things differently today than I did 15 years ago with my children in school. Now they're, at the age they're going to start. One is a parent. I think that, yeah, you can't cower in fear. You put yourself in the biblical times. Daniel is going to go into a lion's den, and it's like, well, okay, what are you going to do? You're going to go, and you just go in the boldness of God and figure God will either protect you or he won't. and that's not up to you. That's up to God. Of course, a lot of the Bible stories end up that God did protect, but then Stephen, he didn't, so you have to accept both. But you never compromise truth. You never compromise the word. You speak it and teach it in the most loving way and with gentleness, as Peter says, as possible, but still truthfully. I think you have to acknowledge I don't have the answers, with especially the younger generation, the things they're going through. I mean, there are children who literally think they're cats, and they got, cat litter boxes in public school bathrooms. And it's like, and we're talking in this area, when we're not talking like, well, that's over in the weird place, no, this is here. Right. I'm sitting down with a student and we're playing whatever, checkers, probably not checkers, but whatever game. And they say, why don't we have a litter box at church? I don't know how I answer that, but you got to be honest. Well, I'll say, well, because we don't have any cats here. Well, I think I'm a cat. Well, what makes you think? I mean, somehow we've got to get into the conversation and not just shut them down and not just say you're dumb or not, but that's ridiculous. Don't talk like that. They're really thinking that, obviously, because it's happening. Not all the gender stuff, is going on. I think I'm a boy now. It's like, well, why? Like, honestly, why? What makes you think that? Well, because Susan's a boy now. It's like, well, what does that have to do with you? I mean, I think that we have to question them and let them come up with answers, because there are no answers. There's no reason you feel like a cat or like a boy or a girl when you were born the other way. But again, it comes with us patiently engaging the conversation. We can't run away. We've been running so long that that's why we're at where we're at. Let the schools teach, let the Sunday school teacher teach, let the youth group leader do their thing. And, I'll feed them supper sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and this shows we're not safe in our enclaves, I think.
Yeah.
I don't want to, again, I'm not about stoking the fear. I'm saying we need to be sober-minded about where we are. Our enemy prowls about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And he has been he's got a great track record of deceiving the masses. That's where we are. But if we don't speak the voice of truth loud and clearly, standing up to these lies based on our own fear of what could happen to us as a consequence, that's not our decision to make. There are people who are dying every day. We know at least the names of at least 7 souls who met their maker yesterday. And if that doesn't inspire us, if that doesn't wake us up to the fact that we need to be talking more about eternity, not less. Like the political discussions we have in the here and now, none of those matter in light of eternity, unless it's to assert the truth of what God says is true and right and noble and beautiful. And it doesn't matter what your tax rate is. And it really doesn't matter what your views on foreign policy are, except for the here and now. And eternity is an awful long time. Eternity matters an awful lot more. And what we ought to be doing is speaking the name of Jesus a lot more than we say Joe Biden or Donald Trump or, pick your leader. And we ought to be praying an awful lot more than we are posting. And that's for me as well. I'm preaching to myself. Do I pray about these things as much or more as I'm posting online about my opinions? I don't know. I mean, I probably need to repent. I need to take stock of that or reprioritize my time. But if we are unwilling to stand up, I guess my main conviction in all of this is we cannot be silent in the face of evil. We have to speak up and stand up against it. And there's a lot of disturbing things that are going on in this world, but we can't run away and hide or just attack safely from our own little towers. We have to be willing to engage the battle. And that means, as the people of God, we have a very different mentality to the rest of the world. This kingdom is not of this world, Jesus said. And that means that our weapons are not the same. We have the sword of the Spirit and the shield of faith. We have the power of God, yes, but that power calls us to reach out in love towards our enemies, the same way Christ did toward us. That is a tricky thing. I mean, I know when I go into stores now, for example, and I see women who have male names and male, shorter haircuts or however you want to, like, they're very clearly seeking to make a statement about who they are. And it seems like it might be, somewhat contradictory to the way God created them to be. The way that I can help is by smiling at them, is by striking up a conversation with them, is by seeing them as a human being. But I am not going to acquiesce to any sort of lies. I can react to them in love. I'm also not going to come at them in a combative fashion and immediately say, call them some sort of, derogatory term, whatever. I would never do that. That's not going to be helpful, but it's also not going to show them love. And that's why we should be engaging from that in the first place. Now, something that I thought was interesting, I don't know if you've seen this particular interview, but there was a man who was seduced into that gender confusion, started identifying as female, but then became a detransitioner. He regretted that and has gone back to living as in conformity with his biological sex. So detransitioner. And he had this fascinating interview where he was asked, what should Christians do? And he said, this is difficult, but do not use the whole preferred pronouns. Don't acquiesce on the language. Say my name. And if you can get to know somebody enough that it's okay. And sometimes there's name changes and things like that involved as well. It can be dicey territory. And he acknowledged that, but he said, it's not about those feelings. It's about reestablishing who I am as a human being. And all of the rest of these words have become, little verbal minefields where everyone's looking for a reason to be offended. And the emotions can turn and change so quickly because the people that are in this morass, this confusion, it varies from day to day. It's so volatile that we're taking disturbed individuals and expecting them to set these boundaries and say, okay, well, we'll do whatever makes you happy, but these people don't know what's going to make them happy. And those are essentially his words. I'm kind of paraphrasing there, but yeah. I'll link to that interview below because I think it's well worth watching. But he said, don't acquiesce on the pronouns, but try to engage in discussion. Try to lovingly start asking questions, exactly like you're talking about, Dan. Well, what made you think this way? Or, where does that come from? Why these are things that I like. These are things that you like. And I'm a man and you're a woman. So, why can't we like those same types of things? Getting to know them as a human being and bringing them back to a sense of understanding that God made them for a reason. God made them for a purpose, and he did not make a mistake between their body and their mind, between their body and their soul. And I'm taking that advisedly into while recognizing that this is a hard stand to take now. just saying the things that we're saying,
Yeah.
on the radio right now is something that can get people, quote unquote, canceled and can cause them to be, unpopular. It can cause them to suffer consequences, the wrath of the mob, so to speak. We know where the power is. We know where the real power is, but our culture is waging war, and they're the ones who really brought this fight, but we're the ones who have been running away. And I think that's on us. And I don't think we have the freedom to run anymore. This is serious stuff. It's not enough to just let the next generation go, be crazy for a while because they're going to grow out of it. They're doing things they can't grow out of. They're doing things that they cannot reverse, and we're letting it happen. And the responsible adults in the room need to stand up and speak boldly because we care.
Absolutely. And it's a long game. It's not one conversation or, well, we met 3 times. Why hasn't anything gotten better? These kids have been raised with no foundation in many ways. And so it's like it takes a long time to build a foundation under an already built building, right? And to reestablish or either establish or reestablish some type of basic moral framework and understanding of life and understanding of eternity. And you're talking to people who in many places are going to kick back all of that. They're going to push back. Oh no, that's not real. That's what you believe. And it's like, well, there'll be times of frustration. There'll be times you want to quit, you want to give up. But you know what? The entertainment industry never quits.
Good point.
Those behind the change in the public education, they never quit. They keep adding more elements and more places where they're indoctrinating into certain areas. We can't quit. We can't just try 2 or 3 times I've met 6 months, or we had them in a class. We have to be in this for the long game and engage the people around us. We can't be in our little corners and our little homes and our little churches and whatever we're doing. I think, I think literally, I think every single church should start a school. Let's,
Yes.
I mean, I really do.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. I say that to our leaders and they look at me like, no. And great. One of these days it'll catch and it'll happen. But
I volunteer to teach recess.
Okay, yeah, there we go. I mean, we need to really figure this out, because if I don't want to make this against public education, but if a major segment of what's educating our children is failing our children and they have no intention of changing, then we need to pull the rug out from under them and change the next generation. We can't. We're not playing games. We're talking about our kids, our country, our future, eternity. We're talking about these children who just died. We can't play around. We have got to make movements toward change. The progressives are progressive because they make little tiny changes at a time, and we need to start making those little changes back, and not just fighting them and saying no. We're going to reverse whatever. Let's reverse all of it. But we have lost the hearts of this generation, and so we have got to get back in and regain credibility with them. And like you mentioned before, it's really love opens that door, and that's hard. When you're biting your tongue thinking, man, if I could say what I really want to say right now, you'd punch me in the face. So you've got to bite your tongue and
turn and let them slap the other cheek. We're prepared for that.
Exactly.
See? And that's not as metaphorical as we'd like for it to be. That's the problem. It's not a metaphor anymore.
Yeah, right.
But it's real. And I think we just have to get a lot more comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And some of us have been practicing being uncomfortable and weird for years. So it's just for this moment. Like, I'm in my element now. I'm the weirdo. Dan Hudson is our guest today. We're responding to what happened in Nashville, the tragedy, the crime that happened in Nashville, and responding more specifically to what do we do as God's people to take a stand for what's right and true, to protect the innocent, the good, the true, and the beautiful, and hold that up in a world that is ugly, in a culture that celebrates death, that continues to perpetuate these wages of sin and brokenness and the curse over and over again. How do we shine the light of the gospel in the middle of all that? It takes courage. It takes being bold. It takes being lion-hearted, saints. I think it's time for us to armor up and head in, because this matters too much to just say, oh, well, I'm going to hide away and I'm going to hide my bushel or hide my light under a bushel, and that's going to work out. It didn't work in Sunday school class, and it's not going to work now. I think Jesus has called us for just such a time as this. And how do we respond? We'll have a couple more practical tips when we come back. It's time to armor up. Like it or not, we're in this thing. And fortunately, we do not go alone. So we'll talk just a few more minutes on the other side on FaithWorks Live.
Information that matters to you and your family. This is Your Beacon, Iowa's Hope 940.
Thanks for sticking with us on this Armor Up conversation with Dan Hudson from Pathway Church in Johnston. Dan, I really appreciate you leading this and giving us your pastoral counsel, the voice of compassion, healing, the voice of scripture. It matters so much, because I'm over here in an emotional state saying, oh no. I mean, it's really hard to respond, not to react emotionally, but to react out of the truth of God's word and his sovereignty. At the same time, as a Christian mom, I want to protect my kids, but I want to love my enemies. And this world makes that a challenge sometimes. So I want to be bolder every single day, but I want to be motivated by love. So basically, after this half an hour of unpaid therapy, I appreciate your time. And here's the takeaways that I have. So you'll see if you agree, and you can add what you think as well. I think we need to be bold, like we've been talking about. We cannot stay silent in the face of these lies. It seems like there's this overwhelming cultural push. The devil has really trained this culture on one specific lie. And he does that all across the board. When you look at like Cleon Skousen's The 5,000-Year Leap is a great read. I highly recommend. It details the cycles of society and where we go from being enslaved to gaining prominence, gaining position. We gain our freedom, and then we gain prosperity. We get lax, we get lazy, and then we had to cycle back into slavery and oppression. And it's been that way from the beginning of the world, unfortunately. So recommend that read. We'll put a pin in that for later. But what I see is a need for courage. We cannot go off to our own little enclaves like we're frozen chosen and everybody else doesn't matter. Like the rest of the world can just go burn because we're okay in our houses. But, and also, the main place of where this whole cultural revolution starts is in our homes, in our hearts, and in our churches, because that's the area where we have the most influence, where we have, we can focus on being good wives, husbands, moms, dads. We can focus on being present as grandparents and leading the way for our kids and for our churches, those communities. We have to get ourselves straight, get ourselves right, and rally around one another to provide the unity, the encouragement that we need. And that's like your fortress over here. But it is time to go out. So you armor up and you get strengthened up in the fortress. You train yourself to be ready for such a time as this. So you're training the kids, and that's your main defense, your main object. But then when you go out into the battlefield, you have strategy. So you don't just defend, you also have to think about how to engage in such a way as you move forward. You move forward towards the goal, you advance towards the enemy, and you move into enemy territory. And that's where I think a lot of Christians get weak-kneed. We're not sure how to do that. And as we've been detailing over this last hour, our enemy is Satan. He's the enemy of our souls, but he has deceived and captured an awful lot of people to do his evil bidding. So if we can see them, if we can see the people that maybe they're standing on the battlefield hurling insults at us, and, sometimes broadly speaking, a few more other things, God forbid, get violent. But what we know is that these people have been deceived by lies. And if we can proclaim the truth to them, by God's grace, we might win some. By God's grace, they can receive that same forgiveness and mercy and atonement that we have because he first loved us. So those are my takeaways for the day. What do you have? Please add your wisdom to my babbling.
I look at the situation we're talking about, and it's all, I think this young woman went there to die. What got her there? Society failed this girl growing up, and this young woman. I mean, she went to a church, she went to a Christian school. Now, I don't know what the teachings are of that particular congregation or that particular school, so I don't know if that led to her confusion, or fed her confusion, or went the other direction. I can't answer that. But I do know all of society has failed her because her friends, people around her, evidently were confused. That's how usually it works. And they think, well, they're confused about gender. I am too. So I don't know. And so when you go to the counselor at school and then they agree with you rather than correct you, that's a failure. When they go to the doctor and they agree with you rather than correct you, that's a failure. They go to a psychiatrist and now the government says you have to agree with them rather than correct them. That's a failure. So the government has failed them. The adults have failed them. The previous generation has failed them. They're getting failed everywhere. And then we sit back and say, well, I can't believe this happened. This is just awful. It's like, well, we created that. And so that's why, like I say, we've got to be part of the reversal, because government's not going to help. The counseling world's not going to help. Medical field's not going to help. They can make money on doing surgeries. I mean, all the things we used to count on to help, it's not going to help. It's you, Christian. You have to be the one to save this next generation. And you mentioned boldness and courage. We need that, just not in arrogance. Go with confidence, but not arrogance. And I think that's key as well.
Yeah. Well, we have to, again, see the other person as someone who's deceived by the enemy, someone who is enthralled by
the enemy.
Right. They are they're captured, held in the same delusion that the devil has over us. And we can relate in that way. Because I think there's a lot of Christians who sort of look at the crazy haired TikTok generation, and they think I can't relate to that. But you can understand what it means to be in darkness and having seen the light. You can understand what it means to being lost and now you're found, to understand that you deserved the punishment of hell, and God's grace extended through Jesus Christ means that you can walk in the light and fellowship with him, that the blood of Jesus will cleanse us from all unrighteousness, and that offer is available to the person that's screaming on the other side of the picket line, or that person that's fighting you in social media or wherever that might be. Coming into having more interactions, in-person interactions, I think are pretty important. So for Christians, again, we have to shore up our homes. That is our refuge. That's our fort, so to speak. And that's where we train up our kids, and it's where we encourage and strengthen and build each other up. But then we have to go out into the world, and we have to engage in such a way as we win our former enemies over to become our brothers and sisters in Christ. So our goal is not to destroy, like that's the word that's out on YouTube. You just destroy your opponent in a debate. Our goal, as many clicks as that might get you, as much money or prestige, that's not what this is about for a follower of Christ. It's about engaging with them in such a way as they're no longer your enemies, because they're now your brother or your sister in Christ, and you're walking together in the new kingdom life. So that's my goal. I don't know how many clicks this will get us, Dan, but I think we said we said the truth. We spoke up, and that was my goal today. Thank you so much for your counsel, for your wisdom, for sharing this. This is such a hard thing to look at the world around us and think evil is not going to win. Evil is not going to win. Death will not win over life. The same power that raised Jesus Christ from the grave is alive, and it's in you and me. And that is our goal, and that is our hope. This hope is not in the darkness of this world. And yet the light still shines, even if the darkness doesn't understand it. That's where we're called to advance the light of the gospel of Christ into the darkness. We're not supposed to affirm the darkness or have fellowship with the darkness, but we're supposed to advance into the darkness, carrying the light. No more hiding your light under a bushel. Not that you ever do. Dan, you never hide, you shine bright. So thank you, sir.
You bet.
This is live from my heart and my head. So thank you for joining this roller coaster. Hopefully this has helped respond in a Christian way to tragedies like this. It's not just tragedies. These are crimes being perpetuated, crimes of evil perpetuated against the innocent. And it is right for us to be heartbroken. It's right for us to be angry. And it's right for us to demand justice in these situations, but also to respond with the truth of Christ. That even when Jesus went to the cross, he had this confused woman in mind. He had you and me in mind. And he looked at the heinousness of our sin and he paid that debt with his own blood. And that's why we can rejoice. We can have the hope of life in Jesus Christ. And if you'd like to talk more about that, hit me up. Let me know. Rebecca Haynie is my name. Check out, send a comment down below. Post a comment down below. Message me here. We're at Faith Works Live on Facebook, or reach out however you're watching or seeing this. Get in touch with me, and would love to continue this conversation a little bit more about what that looks like to know Jesus, to make him known in this world. And until then, we have a mission. So let's be about it.